Hey guys, welcome to Insights into Books podcast, where we discuss insights of significant books which changes our lives. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating journey, I think. It's one that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about, intelligence, growth, and even how we interact with the world. Because
Yeah.
we live in a world that just never stops changing, right? So what if the most valuable skill isn't actually what you know right now? What if it's your ability to uh, rethink what you think you know? That's what we're diving deep into today. It's about why continuously questioning our beliefs, sometimes unlearning old ways, and even embracing the discomfort of doubt, why that might be the most powerful path to personal and professional evolution.
That's precisely it. And it's crucial to understand this isn't about being, indecisive or constantly flip-flopping. Not at all. It's really about being dynamically informed, truly adaptable. We're going to explore how actively engaging in what we're calling rethinking allows you, the listener, to navigate complexity much better and also build stronger relationships and, frankly, truly thrive in an environment that is constantly evolving around us. It's about agility, mental agility.
So, our journey today will unpack, hopefully, why our natural tendencies often prevent us from rethinking. We'll look at the practical steps you can take to cultivate this crucial mindset. And maybe most importantly, how it transforms not just your individual thinking, but also your relationships and potentially even entire organizations. It's a profound shift, isn't it? Moving from maybe a fixed way of thinking to one of constant, curious evolution. Aye. The indispensable skill, embracing rethinking and unlearning. Okay, let's unpack the core message here first. The fundamental idea we're exploring is that in this constantly changing world, the ability to reconsider your views, to really rethink and sometimes unlearn, is actually far more valuable than just piling up precise knowledge or clinging tightly to strong, unshakable beliefs. It's really about cultivating flexibility over, let's say, rigid conviction. You might believe, like many of us do, that deep expertise and firm convictions are the signs of intelligence. But what if, ironically, they're the very things that can sometimes confine us, box us into narrow ways of thinking, and prevent our growth?
That's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? How often we're inadvertently confined by the very expertise and knowledge we've worked so hard to build. We've invested so much time, so much effort, that we start to see what we know as part of our identity, or maybe as this unassailable asset we have to defend at all costs. But the argument here is compelling. Instead of seeing our established views purely as assets to be defended, we should actively view them as potential limitations. Think about that. Potential limitations. Now, reconsideration isn't about just throwing everything out the window. Of course not. It means actively questioning, investigating, analyzing your own opinions, your own beliefs. It's a crucial skill for critical thinking that applies across every single aspect of your life. It enables you to adapt and thrive in an environment that, let's face it, knows no real stability anymore. Think about it for a second. How many times have you been absolutely certain about something, only to realize later that some new information, some new perspective completely shifted your understanding? That's rethinking in action. That's the power we're talking about.
Yeah, that feeling of, oh, I never thought of it that way before. To really drive this home, let's maybe consider a really harrowing real life situation. Picture the Man Gulch wildfire in Montana back in 1949. A team of elite smoke jumpers. These guys were trained to the absolute peak of their abilities. They parachute in to combat this blaze. Now, most of them followed their rigorous training exactly to the letter. They attempted to outrun the flames by racing up this steep canyon wall. Tragically, almost all of them perished, trapped by the inferno. But one litter, the foreman, a man named Wagner Dodge, did something completely different. Radically different. He improvised. He created what he called an escape fire, setting a small fire ahead of him to burn a patch of ground, and then he lay down in the ashes as the main blaze literally roared over him. He completely defied conventional wisdom, his training, everything he knew up to that point, and he saved himself from certain death. This dramatic story just highlights so starkly the difference between rigid adherence to what you know and that vital mental flexibility. It's such a vivid illustration of how, when new facts emerge, the best response is often to let go of old ideas, even if they were effective once, and instead innovate, to rethink.
It's a chilling example. The tragedy of the other smoke jumpers perfectly illustrates what we can call the conviction assumption process. It sounds a bit technical, but it's really our natural, often unconscious tendency. When we encounter new information, our gut inclination is often to seek out data that confirms our existing views. We filter everything through the lens of what we already believe, and this leads to what's often called calcified thinking. Our ideas harden, they become rigid truths, really difficult to change even when compelling new evidence stares us in the face. This cycle, where maybe a bit of overconfidence reinforces our beliefs, leading us to constantly confirm our viewpoints, it can blind us to other perspectives and result in this false sense of certainty, overconfidence in our decisions. Dodge, however, he engaged in what we call a reconsideration process. He approached his beliefs and that rapidly escalating, terrifying situation with profound curiosity rather than certainty. He instinctively, in that critical moment, acknowledged what he didn't know. He investigated, expressed a crucial blend of humility and doubt, and that allowed him to gain new knowledge in real time, to creatively innovate and ultimately save his life. He didn't just think differently, he acted differently because he was willing to unlearn in that moment.
And the implications of this dynamic, this conviction versus reconsideration, they play out dramatically, not just in these life or death situations, but also constantly in the world of business and innovation. Think about Mike Lishritis and BlackBerry. He was a tech prodigy, right? His creation became immensely popular. It dominated the wireless communication market, especially revered for its physical keyboard. People love that keyboard. But his unwavering belief in that physical keyboard, which was once a primary reason for BlackBerry's huge initial success, ironically became this debilitating blind spot. He failed to rethink as the smartphone market just exploded and evolved around him. He clung to an old model that simply no longer served the changing consumer needs. And this inability to unlearn, to adapt, ultimately led to BlackBerry's pretty precipitous downfall. It's quite shocking at the time.
It really was. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you see such a stark contrast with someone like, say, Steve Jobs. Now, initially, Jobs himself was reportedly quite resistant to the idea of a smartphone. Hard to believe now, right? He believed in simpler, more focused devices at the time. But, and this is critical, he was persuaded by his engineers to rethink his stance. He listened. He looked at the data, he listened to the emerging possibilities, and he was willing to shed his previous conviction about simpler devices. The result: the revolutionary iPhone, which fueled Apple's massive success and completely transformed how we all interact with technology. This highlights such a critical lesson. Clinging rigidly to what was successful in the past can actively prevent us from seeing what could be successful in the future. Even constitutions, the foundational documents of nations, designed to be enduring, they accept amendments. They adapt to new realities over time. So why shouldn't our personal thinking, our own deeply held beliefs, why shouldn't they also be open to amendments when new evidence or changing circumstances arise? The refusal to change, that inability to let go of a thought or an idea that no longer serves us well, can be incredibly costly, both personally and professionally.
Okay, so it's clear that not rethinking can be costly, even dangerous. But let's flip that. What does this all mean for us, the individual listener, in our day-to-day lives when we make that conscious effort to rethink? What are the real benefits? You mentioned it improves interaction, self-awareness, openness. Can we unpack those a bit more?
Absolutely. And this really gets to the heart of why cultivating this skill is so valuable. So what tangible benefits can you realistically expect? Firstly, as you said, you'll experience dramatically improved interactions. And this isn't just about being nicer or avoiding arguments. It's much deeper. It's about shifting the fundamental objective of a conversation. So instead of entering a discussion with the goal of winning or proving you're right, you approach it with genuine curiosity. Tell me more about why you see it that way. This subtle yet profound shift tends to disarm defensiveness in the other person, and it transforms what could be a confrontation into more of a collaborative exploration of ideas. It helps prevent those frustrating personal echo chambers where, nobody's truly listening. Everyone's just waiting for their turn to talk and make their point. When you're open to questioning your own ideas, you become less anxious or defensive when your beliefs are challenged. You start to genuinely consider perspectives that maybe before you would have just dismissed out of hand.
That makes a lot of sense. You're not defending a fortress anymore. You're exploring a landscape together. And it goes deeper than just better conversations, doesn't it? You mentioned self-awareness and humility.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Secondly, you cultivate enhanced self-awareness and, importantly, humility. The very act of questioning what you think you know forces you to reflect on your own biases, your assumptions. We all have them. It helps you realize, maybe gradually, maybe sometimes suddenly, that you are not always right. Nobody is. This awareness naturally develops a deeper sense of humility about your abilities and your knowledge. It's interesting, the Latin roots of humility actually mean from the earth. It signifies being grounded, being aware of our flaws, our fallibility. It's a critical step in personal growth because it helps you recognize your cognitive blind spots and revise your thinking accordingly. It's about accepting that your current understanding is merely a snapshot in time, not the complete final picture. There's always more to learn.
I like a snapshot, not the complete picture. And beyond that self-awareness, this journey naturally leads to, as you said, a greater openness to new ideas, which, for many people, I think, myself included, is perhaps the most exciting part.
Precisely. That's the third key benefit. You foster a truly greater openness to new ideas. Practicing reconsideration allows you to embrace being wrong. Yes, embrace it as an opportunity to learn something new, rather than seeing it as a failure to be avoided at all costs or something embarrassing. Instead of feeling apprehensive or anxious when you encounter something you don't know or something that contradicts what you believe, you'll actually start to feel excited about what you're about to discover. It instills in you a genuine love of discovery, a love of new knowledge. It turns what might have once been apprehension or even feeling threatened by a different idea into genuine excitement and curiosity. You're no longer afraid of a new idea because it might contradict an old one. You welcome it as a chance to update your internal software, so to speak. 2. The individual journey. Mastering your own mindset.
Okay, so we understand why rethinking is so valuable. Now let's get into the how. When it comes to our individual journeys, mastering our own mindset, the sources talk about how we often fall into these default modes when we think or talk. Like, we might find ourselves acting like a preacher, sort of self-righteously asserting our principles without really considering other views. This is the way. Yeah. Or maybe we slip into prosecutor mode, relentlessly arguing to prove others wrong, getting combative instead of thoughtful, focusing on poking holes. Or perhaps we act more like politicians, constantly seeking approval, trying to win people over to our side, prioritizing agreement over maybe objective truth. But there's a fourth mode mentioned, a much more powerful one, that really fosters this rethinking we're talking about.
Yes, the suggestion is to consciously try and adopt a scientist's mindset. Now, what does that mean in practice? Well, a scientist's core identity, ideally, is driven by curiosity, by open-mindedness, and a fundamental willingness to rigorously test hypotheses with evidence, especially if it means abandoning old beliefs that they might have held dear for a long time. This is fundamentally about seeking truth, not just winning an argument or gaining popularity or feeling right. It means reframing your views, not as these unassailable facts carved in stone, but as hypotheses. Hypotheses that are always open to revision based on new data. It's about actively seeking out information that contradicts your existing beliefs, rather than just comfortably settling for information that confirms them. The goal is constant testing and retesting. As the great scientist Louis Pasteur famously put it, we should worship the spirit of criticism. Even encouraged his collaborators, apparently, to try and ruin your own experiments. Think about that. Ruin your own experiments, and only to proclaim your discovery after having exhausted all contrary hypotheses. This rigorous self-scrutiny, this active pursuit of potentially disproving your own ideas, is paradoxically what leads to true certainty and often profound joy in discovery.
Wow, ruining your own experiments. That really lands. It sounds so counterintuitive, doesn't it, to actively try and prove yourself wrong. So practically speaking, how do we apply this scientific thinking in our everyday lives? Say we arrive at a firm conclusion, or we hold a really strong belief about something important. How do we approach that with this scientific lens?
Okay, so when you arrive at a meaty conclusion, a belief you hold strongly, maybe one that's part of how you see things working, ask yourself a transformative question. What evidence would convince me otherwise? Just pause and ask that. What would it take for me to change my mind on this? This simple question is incredibly powerful because it shifts your inner debate away from just defending your prior commitments and feelings and towards examining causal connections and objective facts. What causes this? What evidence supports it? It means being actively open-minded, intentionally searching for reasons why you might be wrong, rather than just instinctively gathering evidence to confirm why you feel you must be right. Again, this isn't about being wishy-washy or lacking conviction. It's about intellectual rigor. It's about holding your beliefs, let's say, loosely enough to revise them when the evidence warrants it. This ongoing process, investigating what you don't know, exploring counter-arguments, rather than just clinging rigidly to old beliefs, this is the very essence of that reconsideration process we talked about. It allows you to constantly refine your understanding, ensuring your mental map of the world stays as current and accurate as possible.
Okay, I can see how asking what evidence would change my mind forces that scientific approach. But let's be honest, it's universally challenging to admit we're wrong, isn't it? Especially when our beliefs feel like such a core part of who we are, Or when we worry that if others find out we were wrong, it might damage our reputation, make us look foolish. But the sources really highlight this very act, admitting wrongness as a cornerstone of growth. And they even suggest there's actually joy in being wrong. That sounds, well, almost paradoxical. How can being wrong be joyful?
It does sound paradoxical, but it's such a profound reframe. Intellectual humility, as we touched on, isn't about lacking self-confidence. It's about being grounded. Remember, from the earth, aware of our flaws, our fallibility. It's recognizing our limitations and acknowledging the inherent limits of our own knowledge. And this awareness is crucial because it opens up what's sometimes called the growth loop. Doubt, that little niggle of, maybe I don't have this all figured out, leads to curiosity. Curiosity then leads to investigation, looking for answers. And investigation finally leads to new learning, to growth. When we recognize our shortcomings, it makes us genuinely curious about what information we might be missing. It reinforces how much we still have to learn, which is actually quite exciting if you think about it. In fact, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman reportedly told Adam Grant something like, "Being wrong is the only way I feel sure I've learned anything." Think about that. When you view mistakes or moments of being wrong have opportunities to learn and improve, the experience can actually become joyful. Why? Because it means you're now less wrong than before. It transforms what often feels like a humiliating admission into potentially an act of integrity, a sign of intellectual maturity rather than incompetence. You learned something.
Less wrong than before. I like that. It reframes it beautifully, viewing being wrong as learning, not incompetence. But still, for many, that fear of judgment is so ingrained. We've all felt it, haven't we? That touch of imposter syndrome, that nagging feeling of not being competent enough, or maybe that you don't really belong, that you're going to be found out. It's usually seen as a negative thing, something to overcome. But the sources suggest it can actually be a kind of secret weapon. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, the imposter syndrome angle is really interesting. Take the story of Halet Thomasdottir, for example. She was a businesswoman, no political experience whatsoever. When she was unexpectedly asked to run for president of Iceland, she apparently embraced her doubts. She didn't pretend to know everything. Her campaign was marked by this humility, this openness about learning as she went. And despite having almost no campaign budget and very little media coverage compared to established politicians, her approach resonated. She vastly overperformed expectations, receiving the second most votes in the election.
Wow, that's incredible. So her doubt wasn't a liability, it was almost an asset.
In a way, yes. Her story is a testament to the power of modest doubt. Now contrast that with overconfidence. Overconfidence often stems directly from ignorance of our limitations. We just don't know what we don't know. This is famously illustrated by the Dunning-Kruger effect. You've probably heard of it. It's where the less people know about a subject, the more they tend to overestimate their own knowledge and abilities in that area. It leads to what's sometimes colloquially called Mount Stupid. At the peak of Mount Stupid, confidence vastly exceeds competence, and often, the worst performers are the most overconfident. They become blind to their weaknesses, resistant to feedback, resistant to new information that contradicts their inflated self-view. Modest doubts, however, like those sometimes experienced in imposter syndrome, can actually be highly beneficial. Why? Because they motivate us to work harder, to work smarter, to prepare more diligently, and to learn more effectively from others. It's about being willing to question your current knowledge while still maintaining confidence in yourself, your ability to learn, your potential, not necessarily confidence in your current state of knowledge. Truly great thinkers, you often find, don't boast about how much they know. They marvel at how little they understand. They recognize that the quest for knowledge is never ever truly finished. They might even see their own imposter syndrome, not as a flaw, but as a helpful reminder to stay curious, stay humble, and continue growing.
That distinction between confidence in ability versus confidence in current knowledge is really key. Okay, this next point feels like a big one, maybe one of the hardest hurdles. Our beliefs are often so foundational to how we see ourselves, right? How we define who we are. Our political views, our religious beliefs, even our professional opinions can feel like part of our core identity. So any challenge to those beliefs can feel like a personal threat, triggering those defensive mindsets we talked about, the preacher defending the faith, the prosecutor attacking the challenger. But what if we could radically separate our opinions from our very identity? Is that even possible?
You've hit on something absolutely essential there. And yes, it's difficult, but arguably crucial for genuine rethinking. When beliefs and opinions aren't just ideas we hold loosely, but become a foundational part of our identity, part of our self-worth or sense of belonging, maybe even our status within a group, then yes, any challenge feels like a personal threat. It triggers what some call our totalitarian ego, which wants to maintain consistency and resist change. It makes us stubbornly attached. So to overcome this, the advice is you must first consciously work to detach your identity from your specific beliefs. The goal is to transform your beliefs from absolute truths into untested hypotheses, hypotheses that are open to examination and revision. This detachment is crucial because without it, any valid criticism of an idea feels like a personal attack on you, not just on the idea itself. And a stark, perhaps extreme warning of what happens when one becomes so stubbornly attached to opinions and merges them completely with identity is the case of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. He went from being a brilliant mathematician and professor to a domestic terrorist, largely fueled by this intellectual rigidity, this inability to question his own increasingly extreme views, which have become his entire identity.
Right, the Unabomber is certainly an extreme and tragic example of where that path can lead. So, okay, detachment is the goal. How do we actually do that in practice? It sounds simpler than it probably is. How do we consciously differentiate our current self from our past self, or learn to identify with broader values instead of specific changeable opinions? What are the steps?
It definitely requires intentional practice. It's not an overnight switch, but it's incredibly empowering when you start doing it. There are some concrete practical steps you can try. First, actively differentiate your current self from your past self. Take a moment, maybe even schedule it, to reflect on who you used to be 5, 10, 20 years ago. What beliefs did you hold then? How have you changed and grown since? One suggestion is to actually draw a simple Venn diagram, past me versus present me. What beliefs overlap? What beliefs are different? This can powerfully illustrate your own evolution, showing how much your perspectives have already shifted. This exercise helps you internalize that identity can and does evolve, and that changing your mind isn't a personal failing or inconsistency, but a natural, healthy part of life and learning. Second, and perhaps even more profoundly, work on identifying with your core morals and values, rather than specific opinions. Anchor your sense of self in broader principles like curiosity, learning, fairness, flexibility, generosity, or integrity. Values provide a much broader, more adaptable framework for your identity than specific, often context-dependent beliefs. For example, think of a teacher who deeply values fostering creativity and education. If they identify with that value, they'll be open to trying new teaching methods, even if those methods contradict a long-held belief about, say, the necessity of traditional homework assignments. Why? Because their core value creativity remains intact and guides their exploration. This shift allows you to revise your more specific views based on new evidence or experiences without feeling threatened, without experiencing an identity crisis. You choose your views, and the incredible freedom is that you can choose to rethink them anytime you want. Your identity becomes about growth in principle, not static positions.
Identifying with values like curiosity or learning rather than specific stances, that feels much more adaptable and less brittle. Okay, so as we strive to detach beliefs from identity and cultivate this humility, one might worry, am I going to lose all my conviction? Become wishy-washy. But you mentioned earlier the goal isn't to eradicate confidence, nor is it to drown in paralyzing self-doubt. It seems what's truly crucial for growth is finding that delicate balance, that sweet spot between confidence and humility.
That's a critical distinction, absolutely. What we're aiming for is often called confident humility. It's a beautiful pairing of concepts. It means having faith in your ability to learn, to adapt, to succeed eventually. Confidence in your potential, while simultaneously remaining humble enough to question your current methods, to acknowledge your weaknesses, and to recognize that there's always more to learn. Too much confidence, untempered by humility, makes you overly assured, maybe even arrogant. You become focused only on what you already know, leading you to overlook weaknesses and crucial knowledge gaps. That's the danger zone, remember Mount Stupid. But too much doubt, on the other hand, can paralyze you. It can make you fearful, hesitant, unable to act or try new things, trapping you in inaction. So the balance is absolutely key. Self-assurance without self-awareness can easily breed arrogance. But humility, when paired with confidence in your ability to learn, helps you recognize your blind spots, remain open to new information, and continuously grow. It's confidence in your capacity to learn, not in the absolute certainty of your current knowledge base.
Confident humility. I like that framing. So how can we achieve this delicate balance, practically speaking, in our daily lives? Are there actionable steps we can take to cultivate it more consciously?
Absolutely. It's something you can actively work on. To achieve this balance, first, try to be rigorously honest about your abilities. Conduct a realistic self-assessment. What are you genuinely good at? Where are your areas for development? If you find yourself consistently thinking you're above average in most things, that might be a red flag for overconfidence, making you likely to miss crucial knowledge gaps. This isn't about harsh self-criticism, it's about grounded self-awareness. Second, try acknowledging your limitations positively. View weaknesses not as failures to be ashamed of or hidden, but as natural opportunities to learn, grow, and improve yourself. Frame them as areas of potential without putting yourself down or becoming demotivated. This positive framing transforms perceived deficits into exciting challenges. Thirdly, actively work to discover your knowledge gaps. A really great practical way to do this is to gather all the information you think you have about a subject and then try to explain it clearly to someone else, as if you were teaching them from scratch. If they struggle to understand you, if they can't follow your logic, or if you struggle to articulate it coherently, that's a strong indication that you probably need to do more research or refine your own understanding. This active process of teaching, or attempting to teach, actively seeks out what you don't know. It enables continuous improvement, solidifies what you do know, while clearly highlighting areas for further exploration. It forces you to confront the gaps. 3. The interpersonal dance. Changing minds and fostering growth with others.
Okay, we've spent a good amount of time on the individual journey, mastering our own mindset. Now let's shift focus. What about interacting with others? We've all been in those frustrating arguments, right? Where everyone's talking, maybe even shouting, but absolutely no one is truly listening. It feels less like a conversation and more like, I don't know, people just asserting their views, maybe even competing to be the loudest or the most right. What if the key to truly influencing others, to maybe helping them rethink their own positions, isn't just what you say, but fundamentally how you listen and what kinds of questions you ask?
That's a profound shift in approach, and often much more effective. To genuinely influence others, to open the door for them to perhaps rethink their own positions, you really need to listen primarily to understand, not simply to win the argument or find flaws in their logic. This means demonstrating genuine active interest in their perspective, asking open-ended, non-judgmental questions designed to encourage them to think for themselves, rather than just delivering your own pronouncements or counter-arguments. This is really at the heart of a technique called motivational interviewing, which is highly effective and used widely in counseling, coaching, even healthcare. The core idea is to guide others to discover their own motivations for change. You're not telling them why they should change. You're helping them find their own reasons. The 3 main pillars of this approach are asking open-ended questions. Tell me more about. How do you see? Practicing reflective listening, which means paraphrasing back what you hear to ensure you understand correctly. So if I'm hearing you right, you feel. And encouraging what's called change talk, listening for and gently reinforcing any statements they make that lean towards rethinking or changing. And crucially, you do all this without directly persuading, advising, or telling them what to do. Consider the example of the vaccine whisperer, Dr. Arnaud Gagneur. He successfully used this method to talk with hesitant parents about vaccine safety. He didn't come across as a preachy know-it-all authority figure. Instead, he asked questions, listened deeply, and allowed the parents to arrive at their own conclusions through their own reasoning, not his forceful arguments. He empowered them to think it through.
That's fascinating. So it really is about guiding them to their own insight rather than just pushing information or arguments onto them. It reminds me of that really interesting example of Harish Natarajan, the world champion debater. He faced off against Project Debater, this IBM AI system.
Yeah.
The AI had access to a massive knowledge base, right? It could present declarative statements, facts, figures with incredible speed and accuracy. Yet in a public debate they held about whether government should subsidize preschools, Harish, the human, actually changed more minds in the audience than the super intelligent AI did. The AI had the knowledge, but Harish clearly had something more. What was it?
Harish's success really highlights the power of what you might call a collaborative approach or a dance over a purely declarative battle. He intuitively understood that persuasion isn't just about delivering facts coldly. It's about connection, engagement, and making the other person feel heard and respected. He skillfully used common ground to build rapport with the audience first. He asked them insightful questions, drawing them into the reasoning process. And crucially, he expressed some uncertainty himself, acknowledging the complexity of the issue, showing humility. Unlike the computer's rigid, sometimes almost condescending declarative statements, the fact is X, Harish's questions and his humility engaged the audience. It prompted them to think for themselves, allowing them to draw their own conclusions, which they then felt they owned. He framed the whole thing as a healthy debate, an exploration of different facets of an issue, not a confrontation where one side had to be demolished. This is such a crucial lesson for all of us in our own disagreements. Instead of directly asking, "Why do you believe that?" which can immediately make people defensive and cause them to dig their heels in even further, try asking different kinds of questions. Questions like, how might that policy work in practice? Or, what evidence, hypothetically, might cause you to reconsider your view on this? If the answer to that last question is nothing, well, then you've likely identified a completely fixed view, and you know there's probably no point in continuing that particular debate. You haven't attacked them, but you've gained clarity. This kind of strategic questioning allows people to explore the underpinnings and implications of their own views without feeling attacked. It focuses the conversation on causal connections, potential future states, evidence, rather than just defending prior commitments or tribal affiliations.
Asking how would that work or what evidence would change your mind feels much less confrontational, much more exploratory. Okay, so shifting from battle to dance, but disagreements still happen, right? And they often feel deeply personal, like these battles to be won. This can lead to defensiveness, resentment, entrenched positions. But you're suggesting there's a way to have passionate disagreements, to engage in robust conflict even, that actually leads to better outcomes and fosters growth rather than just damaging relationships.
Absolutely. And this is a really important skill to cultivate, both personally and professionally. The key is to consistently view disagreements as a potential tool for growth and learning, and specifically to focus relentlessly on task conflict, which is disagreements about ideas, problems, processes, data, interpretations, rather than letting it slide into relationship conflict. Relationship conflict is where it gets personal attacks, insults, undermining the other person's character or intelligence. That's destructive. But task conflict can be incredibly productive. When parties involved show genuine respect for one another, even amidst heated intellectual debate, it can paradoxically lead to higher degrees of compassion, understanding, and ultimately cooperation. Because you're united in tackling the problem, even if you disagree on the best way to do it. You attack the problem, not the person. It's interesting. Pliability, the tendency to avoid conflicts just to maintain harmony, is often seen as a positive trait. We praise people for being agreeable. However, in the context of critical thinking, innovation, and effective group dynamics, this constant agreeableness can actually hinder progress significantly. It prevents that healthy friction of different ideas that's often necessary for true challenge, for stress testing assumptions, and for real innovation. It can lead to this false sense of consensus, groupthink, that might mask critical flaws in a plan or an idea. Those people who are not afraid to disagree with our opinions respectfully are invaluable. They push us forward, helping us rigorously evaluate our own thinking and find ways to improve.
That's a great point about agreeableness maybe not always being the best thing. And a truly inspiring example of this kind of constructive conflict comes from the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur. They were famously so close they apparently thought together, but crucially, they also fought together. They had intense, heated debates about their ideas for achieving flight, arguing about wing design, propeller efficiency, control mechanisms, everything. But by all accounts, they never made it personal. They engaged exclusively in task conflict, challenging the ideas, not each other's worth or intelligence. And this relentless pushing, this challenging of every assumption, this task conflict, forced them to think smarter, harder, more creatively. And their results, of course, literally changed the world forever by enabling human flight.
Their story perfectly illustrates the power and the concept of intentionally building what's called a challenge network. This isn't just your friends, it's a carefully cultivated group of trusted critics. People you know will provide honest, maybe even blunt feedback and offer alternative perspectives, without necessarily trying to undermine your morale or cooperation. They care about the outcome, so they challenge the process. It's incredibly easy, and let's face it, comforting, to surround yourself with yes men, people who just affirm your conclusions and make you feel smart all the time. Ego stroking. But strong leaders, innovative thinkers, understand the danger in that. Think about Brad Bird, the director at Pixar. When developing the hugely successful movie The Incredibles, he actually made a point of recruiting Pixar's known misfits, the people known for being a bit disagreeable, the ones he knew would call him out on his bad ideas or lazy thinking. He invited the challenge, and that passionate sparring, that rigorous intellectual debate within the team directly led to a much stronger story, a global success. It proves that we learn infinitely more from people who challenge our thought process, who push us to rethink, rather than from those who just affirm our current state. Weak leaders tend to silence their critics, which ultimately makes them weaker and more vulnerable to dangerous blind spots. Strong leaders actively seek out constructive criticism and grow stronger because of it.
Building a challenge network, that's a proactive step anyone could take. Okay, another trap we fall into, especially in heated discussions or complex issues, is something called binary bias. It's where we oversimplify things, reduce everything down to just two opposing positions, black or white, right or wrong, for us or against us. But real life, real problems are rarely that simple, are they? And this oversimplification can profoundly hinder true understanding, finding common ground, compromise, and even effective persuasion.
That's such a critical point, and one that trips up so many discussions today, especially online. Acknowledging complexity, acknowledging the shades of gray, doesn't weaken your argument. Paradoxically, it often significantly strengthens your credibility. It shows you've thought deeply, considered different angles, and it fosters genuine curiosity in your audience rather than triggering immediate defensiveness. When discussions move beyond binary thinking and embrace nuance, it naturally generates a broader range of viewpoints. It leads to more fruitful debate, less polarization, and crucially, often better cooperation, because you can find partial points of agreement. For example, if you're trying to discuss climate solutions with, say, a conservative audience who might be skeptical of regulation, instead of just pushing hard for emission caps, which might trigger immediate resistance based on their values, you might frame the discussion differently, perhaps around the economic benefits of green tech innovation or the national security implications of energy independence. This approach accounts for the complexity of differing values and interests. It genuinely engages the audience on terms they might find more resonant, helping them see potential cracks in their own, perhaps overconfident initial stance, and prompting them to consider new questions beyond their initial knee-jerk reactions. So to apply this yourself, consciously look for different angles on any important topic. Actively question your own understanding by seeking out diverse sources and perspectives, especially those you anticipate disagreeing with, and proactively work to avoid stereotypes. Stereotypes are the ultimate oversimplification, often stemming from a lack of awareness about the complexity and richness of other people's perspectives and experiences. A useful mental exercise is to think hypothetically. What might my view be if I had grown up in a different background, faced different challenges, had different life experiences? This can help you realize that the experiences and perspectives of others are much more complex than you might have initially assumed. It sparks that vital reconsideration process and leads to a more nuanced, empathetic understanding. 4. The broader impact. Rethinking in organizations and life.
Okay, so we've covered individual mindset shifts and improving interpersonal interactions. How do these powerful principles of rethinking and unlearning scale up? How do they apply to entire teams, organizations, maybe even larger communities? It sounds like it requires a fundamental shift in culture, moving away from maybe a purely performance culture that's obsessed only with immediate results and avoiding errors, towards a more dynamic learning and growth culture that actively embraces evolution, experimentation, and yes, even mistakes as learning opportunities.
Precisely. That cultural shift is paramount. And this organizational transformation really starts with deliberately cultivating psychological safety. This is a concept that's getting a lot more attention now, thankfully. It means creating a shared belief within a team or organization that it's safe to take interpersonal risks, safe to express doubts, to ask questions, to admit mistakes, to voice concerns, even challenge the status quo without fear of reprisal, ridicule, punishment, or damage to your career. In the absence of psychological safety, what happens? Ideas go unexpressed. Critical feedback is withheld because people are afraid. Mistakes get hidden or covered up. And as a result, organizations can become tragically wedded to outdated ideas, inefficient processes, or failing strategies that clearly aren't working anymore, but no one feels safe enough to point it out effectively. New ideas are stifled before they even get voiced. Innovation dies on the vine, and the entire organization suffers from that debilitating, calcified thinking we talked about earlier. A powerful way to build this safety is when leaders demonstrate vulnerability themselves. For instance, by openly sharing their own professional critiques they've received, or past failures and what they learned from them. When managers admit imperfections, admit they don't have all the answers, it normalizes vulnerability. It creates a much safer space for employees to also struggle, make mistakes, ask for help, and engage in the brave, sometimes uncomfortable act of rethinking.
That makes a lot of sense. Leader vulnerability sets the tone. So it's not just about managers modeling good behavior, but maybe also actively inviting and structuring rethinking into the very processes and routines of the organization.
That's absolutely right. It needs to be embedded in the how we do things around here. Leaders should proactively encourage rethinking decision-making processes themselves. So instead of just sharing the final decisions handed down from on high or being singularly obsessed only with the final outcome, did we hit the target? Yes, no. Teams should be encouraged, maybe even required, to share the entire process they use to arrive at those decisions. This means detailing things like, how was the data gathered? What assumptions were made? How were different ideas generated and evaluated? How were dissenting opinions considered? What options were explored and rejected, and why? This fosters what's called process accountability, alongside the usual outcome accountability. Focusing just on outcomes can incentivize hiding mistakes or taking foolish risks, hoping for a lucky win. But explaining the how and why the process allows the whole team to identify potential weaknesses in reasoning, blind spots, or explore alternative solutions that weren't chosen. It helps prevent repeating the same mistakes. And it prompts everyone involved to think critically about the underlying logic, rather than simply accepting directives or outcomes without question. It essentially kickstarts the reconsideration process across the entire organization, encouraging everyone to recognize what they don't know and to question prior assumptions routinely.
And we can see the stark, really tragic consequences of lacking this psychological safety, this process accountability, this rethinking culture by looking at NASA's history, unfortunately. Consider the Challenger and then later the Columbia Space Shuttle disasters. In both incredibly sad cases, investigations revealed that a deeply entrenched performance culture where past successes had bred a dangerous overconfidence and it won't happen to us, attitude left very little room for genuinely doubting or reassessing potentially risky decisions. In the Challenger incident, engineers had identified significant risks regarding the O-rings in cold weather, but those concerns were tragically downplayed, maybe even dismissed, partly due to intense launch schedule pressures. Similarly, with Columbia, falling foam striking the shuttle wing during launch was initially dismissed by some managers as a non-critical maintenance issue, despite engineers raising serious concerns about potential damage. These catastrophic outcomes were, in part, direct results of a culture where the fear of negative consequences for delaying a launch, for raising problems, may have prompted people to hide their mistakes, downplay risks, or hesitate to speak up forcefully. It wasn't a true learning culture where challenges and dissenting voices were actively welcomed, valued, and rigorously explored without fear.
It's heartbreaking, and it highlights the profound danger of having only outcome accountability without robust process accountability. Evaluating how carefully different options were considered, how dissenting voices were genuinely heard and investigated, how risks were objectively assessed that process, is arguably just as important, if not more important for long-term success, than just judging the final result of a single decision. Because a carefully considered approach, based on the best available information and critical thinking at the time, that doesn't lead to the desired outcome isn't necessarily a failure. It's a thoughtful experiment. It's a valuable data point for future learning. As the inventor Thomas Edison famously stated about his long search for a working light bulb filament, "I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that won't work." That mindset encourages ongoing learning and adaptation. It shifts the focus from avoiding blame to maximizing learning, which is essential for any organization that wants to thrive in the long run.
That Edison quote is perfect. Okay, so we've looked at rethinking in organizations. Let's bring it back to the very personal level again for our final section. This whole journey of rethinking isn't just for work projects or intellectual debates. It's profoundly personal, isn't it? It's about regularly reevaluating our own life's direction, our goals, our aspirations, and crucially, not getting stuck in something called identity foreclosure. What is that exactly?
That's right. This applies perhaps most profoundly to our own lives. Many of us, often quite early in life, set fairly rigid life goals and career paths, maybe based on childhood dreams, parental expectations, societal pressures, what our friends are doing. This can sometimes lead to what psychologists call identity foreclosure. It essentially means prematurely settling on a fixed sense of self, defining who you are and what you will do too early, and then closing off alternative opportunities for growth, exploration, and change. You've foreclosed on other possibilities. Now, when you start to feel threatened by the idea that you might actually be on the wrong path, perhaps after years of dedicated study, or climbing a specific career ladder, you might react defensively. You might actually double down and commit even harder to that path. You push yourself further into what might be an undesirable or unfulfilling direction, simply because of the perceived investment you've already made. This is the classic sunk cost fallacy playing out in our life choices. We think, I've invested so much time, effort, maybe money, I can't possibly change course now, even if deep down we suspect it's not the right fit anymore. The core lesson here, the rethinking challenge, is to learn to let go of knowledge, assumptions, and opinions about your life's predetermined path that no longer truly serve you well, that don't align with who you are today.
And Adam Grant shares a really relatable, almost poignant example of this with his own cousin, Ryan. Apparently, Ryan had his heart set on becoming a neurosurgeon from a very young age. He invested immense time, incredible effort into that demanding path, rigorous schooling, intense competition, years of dedication. But deep down, he harbored this quiet doubt, this persistent question about whether it was truly the right fit for him, for his personality, his broader interests. But the sunk cost felt enormous. How could he possibly give up everything he'd worked so incredibly hard for? It felt like failure. Only in his mid-30s, after years of wrestling with this internal conflict, did he finally take the brave, scary plunge into entrepreneurship, a completely different path that turned out to be much more fulfilling for him.
Ryan's story resonates so deeply with so many people because it highlights how these rigid, often early form plans can ironically lead to deep regret and unfulfillment later in life if we don't allow ourselves to rethink them. There's even research suggesting that students who are the most certain about their specific career plans at age 20 are often the ones reporting the deepest regrets by age 30. Because life happens, they change, the world changes. True, sustainable happiness often stems not just from following some predefined path laid out years ago, but from cultivating a sense of purpose and mastery in areas that genuinely align with your evolving values, passions, and interests now. This means being open, truly open, to changing course multiple times throughout your life. Recognizing that this iterative process, this exploration, isn't a sign of failure or flakiness, but actually brings you closer to your true path, the one that fits the person you're becoming. It's also about actively shaping your roles and responsibilities where you can, through something called job crafting. This is where employees proactively redefine aspects of their roles to better fit their evolving skills, values, and interests. Think of the hospital custodian, often cited in organizational behavior studies, who found profound purpose not just in cleaning, but in comforting patients and families, proactively shaping her work to align with her compassionate values rather than feeling rigidly confined only by her official job description. She crafted meaning into her role.
Job crafting. Finding ways to align even our current situation more closely with our values. That's empowering. So, if we want to avoid getting stuck like Ryan, perhaps, or just clinging rigidly to old ideas about what our life should look like, how do we make this kind of personal rethinking a continuous, deliberate practice? How do we build this muscle for personal growth and ongoing fulfillment?
It really needs to be a conscious, cultivated habit, not just something you think about when you hit a crisis. It's about cultivating continual reevaluation. One very practical suggestion is to make it a deliberate practice to schedule regular career checkups, or maybe broader life checkups, perhaps once or twice a year like a dental checkup, but for your life path. During these dedicated check-ins, you intentionally pause and ask yourself a series of probing questions. Questions like, okay, honestly, what has truly changed personally or professionally since I initially chose this path or made that last big decision? Or, have my personal goals, my core values, evolved in ways that this current path no longer fully supports or aligns with? Am I still genuinely challenged, engaged, learning, or have I kind of plateaued? Have I learned most of what I can in this current role or direction? And maybe the big one, have I reached a significant turning point where a deeper reassessment is really needed rather than just minor adjustments? These questions are designed specifically to prompt you to reassess your deepest beliefs and assumptions about the paths you think you should be taking. And importantly, this isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing, iterative process of reflection and adjustment. Think about Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency during the immense crisis of the Great Depression. His leadership was marked by bold, persistent experimentation, a true trial-and-error mindset applied to national policy. He famously encouraged his administration to try methods, and if they failed, to admit it frankly and try something else. Above all, try something was his motto. This extraordinary adaptability, this willingness to rethink strategies that weren't working, led to his 4 election victories and helped guide the nation through one of its darkest hours. This historical example offers a powerful lesson for our personal life goals too. True progress often comes from a willingness to experiment, to learn from what doesn't work, and to pivot without shame or excessive attachment to the original plan. Adam Grant himself apparently dedicates time weekly to this practice. He reaches out to his own challenge network, asking them straightforwardly, what ideas or opinions might I be unknowingly clinging to too tightly right now? It's about regularly scheduling time to question assumptions and evolve, actively fostering the habit of thinking again and again. So maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to consider as we wrap up. Can you imagine a world, or even just your own personal world, where saying, I don't know, is seen not as a mark of ignorance, but actually as a sign of confident humility, a marker of someone committed to learning? And we're saying, I was wrong, is viewed not as an embarrassing admission of incompetence, but as a profound act of integrity, a demonstration of intellectual growth. What would that look like in your life, your relationships, in your work, if you truly embrace those statements not as failures, but as opportunities?
Wow, what an incredible journey we've been on, exploring the profound power of rethinking. It seems so clear now that true growth, true intelligence perhaps, isn't really about how much information you accumulate or how strongly you hold on to your existing beliefs, but rather how gracefully, how effectively, and how willingly you can let go of old ideas that no longer serve you and embrace new ones This isn't just a strategy for success, is it? It feels more like a way of life, one that can lead to really profound personal and maybe even collective transformation, opening up possibilities you might never have imagined otherwise.
Indeed. I truly believe the ability to rethink, to continuously learn, unlearn, and adapt your understanding is perhaps the most crucial skill for successfully navigating our complex and relentlessly changing world. It equips you not just to survive the uncertainties, but to actually thrive within them, to build stronger, more authentic relationships based on curiosity and respect, and to forge a life path that genuinely aligns not with who you were, but with your evolving, growing self.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the power of rethinking. We really hope this conversation has sparked some new insights for you and maybe encouraged you to look at your own beliefs, your assumptions, and the world around you with a fresh, curious perspective. Subscribe the channel for more such insights on various books and also join our social media community to stay in touch and get updated.